Welcome to the NOSA Unleashed podcast, where we want to expose and remove the stigma surrounding mental health by discussing real-life challenges and obstacles that keep us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there is more to life than what you are currently experiencing. Now is the time to end the silence and pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone. Welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. I'm Laura Burgoyne, joined here with my sister, Connie Blackwood, as we today discuss anxiety. And, we all experience anxiety. And, a lot of times we don't recognize it. And so today we want to really help you recognize the signs of what anxiety is, how it manifests in our life. And, once we recognize that, what we can do about it. So Connie, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So to start, there's many things that would be a sign for anxiety. And, I'm going to just quickly list off a bunch of them. And then we'll just, chat about them. Okay, Connie?
Sure.
So some that I know have impacted me and others in my life are sleeplessness. Another one is increased heart rate, digestive issues, headaches, fatigue, worry. Another huge one is difficult concentrating or forgetting things. I'll often feel overwhelmed, and that overwhelm will actually stop me from moving forward in a particular task that I have to do. I'll also be overly emotional. Like I can literally just bawl at a drop of a hat. And there's irritability. And, anxiety can also lead to panic attacks. And also, it will cause us to avoid facing things in our life and also potentially avoid people in our life. Was there anything else that came to mind for you, Connie?
A lot of things that you shared were things I had on my list, but I don't think I've had other things at this
Okay.
point. The thing is, how do we recognize these as signs of anxiety instead of something else? For example, like sleeplessness could also be chalked up to insomnia or hormonal changes or all sorts of different things. So how do you know whether that is as a result of anxiety or a result of those other things? And I think part of it is how many of these symptoms, how many of these signs do you have in your life? And
Right.
are they trying to show you something that you're not recognizing in your life? Like if you're not sleeping because you're worried about a bunch of stuff, well, worry and sleeplessness were on this list. So then, maybe there's an underlying anxiety there that you're not dealing with, or an underlying fear that you're not dealing with. I think for
Mhm.
me, anxiety manifests itself a lot of times when I'm fearful of something, and it makes me anxious about other things that are going on, like, but that fear is in the background. I think of fear as like the background character, while anxiety is the one taking center stage, right? It's got my attention, but yet it's this underlying fear that's been triggered that's not going away. And so, like, for example, if, I'm experiencing, you know, anxiety because I feel like I don't have enough time to get things done, or, if that's a fear. I don't think I'm fearful that I don't have enough time, or I'm fearful that I'm not good enough. And so I'm trying to do these things in the midst of feeling that way or having that fear. And then my anxiety rises as
Mhm.
that fear goes not dealt with. And so I feel like a lot of times it's even an underlying fear that's been triggered. And until we deal with that fear, it's just getting worse, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes I think we don't recognize it for what it is.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like especially some of these physical reactions, right? For example,
Mm-hmm.
the increased heart rate, the digestive issues. Like there's been a lot of times where it's like, oh, I'm having like really big digestive discomfort right now, or my heart is just racing and I have heart palpitations. And I went to the doctor many times with racing heart and heart palpitations, and they put me through, a battery of tests, and came back and told me, Laura, there's nothing wrong with your heart. What you're experiencing is anxiety, right? So a lot of times we're having these physical reactions and we chalk it up to something else, but we're not recognizing the underlying reasons why these things are happening, which is what we want us to help recognize today, which is, what is the underlying thing, right? And I think a good question to ask ourselves when we're having a lot of these things coming on, like you said, if you're having multiple symptoms like this, that's a good time for you to say, okay, what's going on? What's the bigger picture? What are my thoughts? What are the thoughts that I'm having right now? Like what are those prevailing emotions, worries, thoughts, fears that I'm having that could be the source of a lot of these issues in my life, right? I know for myself, when I experience anxiety, a lot of the time it comes with overwhelm, right? And for me, I have difficulty concentrating. Like the other day, I had so much coming at me, and I was sitting at my computer, and literally I had been sitting at my computer trying to work for 5 hours, and I could not get my thoughts together. I could not do any work, right? And it's in those moments where, I had to recognize the fact that, I was feeling a lot of anxiety about a lot of things in my life at that time. And it was overwhelming to the point where I couldn't concentrate. I was having, pain in my neck, increased heart rate. I was starting to get a headache. All of these things were happening to me. And for me personally, how I deal with it is I have to prioritize rest, right? But if we don't recognize what's actually happening in those moments, um, we might completely miss the mark, right? You might be like me when you're having those anxious feelings because you don't recognize it for what it truly is. You're going off to the hospital, sitting in the waiting room for 5 hours just to be told that no, what you're facing is anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think the more that we sit down and realize what's really going on and figuring out what's happening to fuel some of these things, the more we'll be more aware of what's going on with us. I think sometimes we go through life and we are blissfully unaware of what we're going
Mm-hmm.
through. And I say blissfully because, sometimes ignorance is bliss until you realize that you're in uh you're in too deep. Then we're like all of a sudden, now I need to know. Well, you could have figured out long before you got to this place. And for me, that happens. And then it usually results in me having a panic attack, which is very much for me like a heart attack. And so it
Mm-hmm.
terrifies me until I realize, wait a minute, okay, my heart is healthy. That is not my issue. I am actually having a panic attack. Okay, breathe. And as soon as I recognize that it's a panic attack, I can literally slow it down by breathing deeply, and my whole body just calms right down because all of a sudden it's like, okay, I am not dying, right? If you believe that you're dying, the panic attack gets worse, right? Because the anxiety is worse. So it's just like blows out of proportion. And so I've actually practiced it and it's pretty amazing. I can now get my full-blown panic attacks down to completely calm in 60 seconds. Like
Wow.
it's amazing. And all I do is change my breathing. And my brain has acknowledged that this is not going to kill me. This is
Mm-hmm.
just stress. This is just anxiety. And so it takes practice though. Like it doesn't happen overnight where you can just calm yourself down. Like it takes practice and the recognition that, oh no, I'm not having a heart attack. This is just a panic attack. And now I'm trying to get to the point where I'm not in the full-fledged panic attack before I start dealing with the underlying issue, right? I don't want to be there. I want to be
Right.
early stages. Okay, what is this? And like, and figure it out so that I don't have to keep living in that heightened sense of anxiety because I don't want to remain there, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, that's where I go and how I deal with it.
Yeah, another thing that I find useful is, you know, our anxiety is often triggered by something.
Mhm.
So if you can recognize what those triggers are, then you can create strategies around that so that before it actually gets to the point where you have full-blown anxiety and it's getting to like a panic attack or some of these other, uncomfortable or uncontrollable symptoms, that we can actually deal with it, right? And generally, because I've been working on this for so long, generally I can catch it early on. I can catch it before it kind of spirals out of control. But there are times where it's just like, I'm not picking up the signs, I'm not recognizing the triggers, and I'm just kind of going through the motions. And then, when I'm in the thick of it all, then it's like, oh my gosh, how did I get here again? Right.
Mhm.
And, I have to work myself out of it. Right. But what we want to share today is just how important it is to recognize, number one, what stress is and how it affects you and how it, creates anxiety within us. And, we can't really change anything until we acknowledge it, right? Because I know a lot of people in my life, I'll say to them, "Oh, you're struggling with anxiety," and they'll say to me, "I don't have anxiety," right? It's almost like this taboo word, like we don't want to identify with anxious thoughts or being anxious, right? But yet it's like, well, you know, all of these things are manifesting in your life, and I can see that this is your trigger point. But some people aren't willing to acknowledge that, and so then they won't see any change. So the first step is always to recognize when you are struggling with anxiety.
And anxiety doesn't have to be a bad word. It's just meaning that you have a heightened agitation state, basically. And it's
Mhm.
usually because your like negative thoughts are like running rampant and driving you in a certain direction. And your body, like the physical things you're feeling, are a result of that heightened place that you're
Yeah.
sitting in. And, that's why your body starts having issues. It's not unusual for your body to respond to something that's happening to you mentally, emotionally.
Mhm.
Your physical body is part of that whole entity. So when something's happening emotionally or mentally, it's going to impact your body, right? And so we shouldn't be surprised when we see physical effects from anxiety because we are one whole body, mind,
Yeah.
spirit, soul, and physical. It's all one thing, and so they all impact each other. And so, yeah, I think if you're like actually paying attention to what's going on around you and you increase your awareness, you can catch anxiety before it gets out of control, and
Mhm.
you can actually channel it in a different direction. But we'll talk more about that next time.
Yeah. Connie, do you have any last thoughts or things you wanted to share with those that might be listening?
Yeah. Um, if you are one of those people that was like, oh, this is about anxiety, are you serious? I am not an anxious person. But as you've been listening, you're like, wait a minute. Okay, I can actually relate to some of this. I would just want you to take an honest look at it. And, I know that Laura was talking a little bit about the taboo. Ignore that. Don't let that hold you back from actually looking at the situation and going, I must be anxious. I might be anxious about something. Okay, let me examine that further. Why am I anxious? And by getting to the root of why you're anxious, then you can actually do something about it.
Mhm. Wise words. Yeah, I I for years struggled with anxiety and couldn't put a word to it or didn't want to put a word to it. But as I've learned how to recognize it in my life, then it empowers me, like you said, to do something about it. And that's what we really want to encourage all of you listeners to do, is to be able to recognize it for what it is in the moment and then create strategies of how to deal with it. And on that note, I think we're going to end for today, but join us next time as we continue our conversation on strategies of how to overcome anxiety and in your life. So we'll see you next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Bye.
Bye.